That's
Yeah, I think so too. I've been going here for many, many years, but every time I walk in, I just feel like I'm being hugged. I just do. I mean, I've been coming here 30 years, but I miss it. So I haven't come in 2 weeks because we had COVID in our home, but I watched it online, and it was nice to be able to do that. But it's just not the same as being in.
That's how I started, was online, watching it online.
What's it?
And you're right, it's not the same. Wonderful, the message was there, but it just wasn't the warm fuzzy.
Right. And it's just the perfect size to build it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the perfect size.
I used to bring my grandmother, she would stay with me every year, pretty much at Christmas time. So we'd bring her services. She couldn't miss Christmas Eve service. And I remember how beautiful it was.
Oh, yes.
When I first moved to Tallahassee, I came later, once or twice.
You went other places.
I went to all
remember
the
you saying that
churches.
at one of the Sunday schools.
I just couldn't find home. But I came from a small church in Inverness, and it was a healing church, and very, I mean, I felt like I would enrich myself open when I left there, you know, it was a long time for me to get back and heal.
Yeah.
Miss it.
Well, I grew up at First Baptist here in town, and so this was really
a big change.
It was, but you know, I just, I mean, the first time I married an Episcopalian, so the first time, and there was no question he was not gonna go to the Baptist church. So the first time I walked in, it was like, this is home. You know, it just felt so right.
My husband said the same thing, he was raised in Quincy, raised in Tallahassee, raised son practice. And he comes once a year, first time ever. It was actually down in South Florida.
Where in the area?
You did something wrong.
No, I went to the, I don't know.
One day,
Well, one day, you never know.
Yesterday.
I believe that, right, I believe that.
That's where
He comes, he's on the golf course a lot, but, you know.
I think when my husband was still, I retired.
Did you have to drive?
Yes.
Yeah. Computer science.
Mine still works too, but days are
Some of that, yeah.
but
Mostly,
it's
things like,
That's right.
Yeah.
things that interest me are the ways I can.
Well, good morning. I think we should probably get started. We might have a few more people coming in.
Yes.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Just raise your hand if you can't. My name's Marta Messick. I was here last week with Ezekiel, and if you were here then, and come back for Daniel, well, it's one of the most peculiar and most difficult books in the Old Testament. So if you thought Ezekiel was a little strange, well, Daniel is also. I hit the wrong button, sorry, Glenn. Come on in. So here's Daniel on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is painted by Michelangelo, who keeps company on that ceiling with the other major prophets of the Old Testament. And as you can see, he's portrayed as a young man, which he is in the book that's named for him. And it's interesting to me that this poor cherub is having a hard time holding up the book that Daniel's reading from, and he appears to be taking notes over here with a great concentration on his face. I'm not sure what this is. Anybody has any theories?
It just reminds me of from a couple sermons ago where it's
The
thing-
plumb bob?
Yeah, it looks a little bit like
It, I thought that, but it's got two changes. It might be an inkwell, I don't know, but it's interesting, so. Okay, so Daniel is the only apocalyptic book in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we have the revelation of John the Divine, which is another apocalyptic piece of literature. And I just want to make sure we're all clear about what apocalypse means. It literally means an unveiling or a disclosure, which is not how we use the word. Typically, in our parlance, we talk about something being apocalyptic as meaning it's utterly catastrophic, but that's not the meaning in the Bible. In the Bible, it refers to holy information, often given in visions, often about the future. And so the second half of Daniel is that kind of thing. Now, the author was a well-educated and pious Jew who lived under the persecution of the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And during this period, 167 to 164 BCE. Let's see what else I can tell you about that. The name Daniel means God is my judge. The author of the book was not an historical person named Daniel. He, probably he, was using the name Daniel for his book, who was apparently a legendary sort of folk hero, a very wise person, and he's mentioned twice in the book of Ezekiel. But often writers would write under the name of a well-known person, so that's why.
Is there,
Yeah.
why is it dated to this particular ruler who's very infamous? But why is it dated that so precisely?
Biblical historians have figured it
That's
out.
what it
Yeah.
went to.
Yeah. So the thing about the book of Daniel is that it was written in the 2nd century, but it is set in Babylon during the time of the exile, just before and just after the Persians conquered the Babylonians, yet another wave of invasion and a new empire taking over. And that happened in 539 BCE. So it's kind of historical fiction, almost, if you will. So a quick historical recap. If you were here a couple of times before today, we talked a lot about the Babylonian exile when Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the people were deported to Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. Then Cyrus of Persia defeats Nebuchadnezzar. The Jews return to Palestine. rebuild the temple, and then they're under Persian rule for about 200 years until 332. So anybody guess what happens in 332?
Alexander the Great.
Ah, very good. So here's a map, Babylonian Empire. There's Babylon over there with a star. Here's Jerusalem. And just the shape of this empire is kind of the same shape as the Persian Empire, which was so extensive. And here is Palestine. So Alexander the Great conquers Persia, captures Jerusalem, and here's one of a bazillion paintings of this heroic Alexander the Great. And here's Alexander from a very bad movie. I think that's Colin Farrell in a golden crown. Yeah, so fascinating character. Alexander was tutored by Aristotle, became the king of Macedonia in Greece about age 20. He died 12 years later at the age of 32, having created one of the largest empires in history. He founded 20 cities, including Alexandria. And his legacy was the spread of Greek culture, Hellenistic culture, over this huge, expansive territory. He died, ironically, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, and his body was put in a gold sarcophagus filled with honey, and that was placed in a golden casket. So he reputedly wept because he had no more worlds to conquer. And let me back up a minute, I missed something. So when Palestine is under Persian rule for 200 years, it was a province, sort of a minor province of Persia, and it was governed by satraps, which was a name for a provincial ruler. And it was the satrapy of Palestine was called Beyond the River. So it was over yonder in the boondocks of the empire. So what happens after Alexander died? What happens to his kingdom? Well, it was divided up, and two generals, Ptolemy and Seleucus, were the main winners in this post-Alexander period, and each of them turned over their territory to their descendants and therefore created dynasties which warred with each other back and forth. There was always conflict in the region. And things go pretty well for the Jews under Persian rule, and then in the Hellenistic period of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, until the Maccabees revolt against the very wicked Antiochus IV Epiphanes in 165 of the Common Era. So here he is. His name Epiphanes, which he gave to himself, means God manifest, but the common people called him, what they call him? Epiphanes, which means the mad. So here he is looking pretty ruthless and narcissistic. Here he is on one of the coins that, of course, he had to have. So Antiochus desecrated the Holy Temple in Jerusalem by building an altar to Zeus and putting a big statue of Zeus in the temple. And then he sacrificed in the temple a swine. And not only that, he mandated the Jews to offer pagan sacrifices instead of their own worship and forbade the worship of Yahweh on pain of death. Well, this clearly was an unsupportable situation for the Jews, and there was a rebellion. Here is the poor pig in a really bad picture. And Daniel, who talks about this, calls it the abomination of desolation, which I think is a really terrific phrase that you can use about things that you think are just really horrible. That's an abomination of desolation. And it was. So Judah Maccabee was a priest in Jerusalem, and he led a revolt. First, it was kind of a guerrilla war, got more supporters, led a revolt against the Seleucids, captured and rededicated the temple in 164. And that story is the source of the festival of Hanukkah, because he cleansed the temple and lit the lights. He was called the hammer of the Jews. That's what Maccabee may mean. But back to the book of Daniel. The character Daniel serves under 4 kings, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar. Very briefly, he's the guy who saw the handwriting on the wall. So that story is kind of stuck in there. And then Darius the first, king of Persia, and Cyrus the second, king of Persia. So Daniel, the character of Daniel, is a representative Jew who has learned to sustain and enact his distinctive Jewish identity in the presence of these indifferent imperial powers, a task that was required of every serious Jew in the Persian and Hellenistic periods. So that's what Daniel means to the people who were reading the scripture. The book of Daniel is in 2 parts. Some of it's written in Aramaic, some of it's written in Hebrew. And the first 6 chapters are narrative, and then some stories that are written to encourage fellow sufferers under the persecution by illustrating how faithful Jews with divine aid triumphed over their enemies back then in Babylon. And in the book, chapters 7 through 12, 4 dream visions, some of which are very strange, that interpret current history and predict the coming consummation when faithful Jews will have ultimate victory. And today in church, we heard one of the parts of one of those visions, the Ancient of Days. Stop me if you have any questions. So, who is this Daniel in the narrative? I'm sorry, I have to use these sort of children's Bible story illustrations because sometimes that's all you can find. So in the opening passages of the first chapter, after King Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem and loots the temple, deports the people, he orders his palace master to bring together some noble young Israelites who are handsome and without defect, smart and competent, to be educated for 3 years, to go through this sort of training program so that they can serve in the king's court. So Daniel and 3 friends, we'll get to them in a minute, are among those who are chosen. And the palace master gave them new names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, and then his friends were Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. They were supposed to be given the king's daily rations of food and wine, but Daniel politely refuses, no, but firmly refuses to defile himself with such food and drink. So he asked that the 4 of them, his 3 buddies and himself, he asked that an experiment be run, sort of a, we have the control sample and then we have the experimental sample. And what he wanted to do was go for 10 days on nothing but water and vegetables. That's what he asked for. And then at the end of those 10 days, that these 4 should be compared to the other guys who ate the king's rations and drank the king's wine. So after 10 days, they were found to be better looking and fatter than the other guys. And so they were brought before the king, who spoke with them, and no one was found to compare with these 3 Hebrew young men. And whenever the king asked anything, like, tell me about this, or what do you think about this problem? He found them to be, and this is what it says in Daniel, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his kingdom. So they made a good impression. So here's handsome, smart, young Daniel bowing to ruthless King Nebuchadnezzar. So,
interrupt a second?
yeah.
As a vegan, I have to say yay. And also, I have to give a plug to a documentary, You Are What You Eat. It's a study of identical twins.
Okay.
One twin on a vegan diet, the other twin on a healthy but normal diet, not
Yeah.
crap food.
Yeah.
Watch it. I think I'll be joined in my veganism, which God knows I would love.
Well, you certainly have a biblical mandate for it.
It's only healthy.
Thank you for that. Okay, so there's basically 2 kinds of stories in the first part of Daniel. Interpretation stories in which the king has a dream, the king's advisors and magicians and wise men cannot interpret the dream. King flies into a rage, but wait, a hero appears to give the interpretation. The hero is rewarded, and the king learns that the hero's God is superior and all-powerful. So we've heard this plot before. Does this remind you of any other story? Joseph. Yes, exactly. In the book of Genesis. Yeah. Pharaoh has a dream about the 7 fat cows and the 7 skinny cows, and nobody can figure it out. And then Joseph comes forward. He's rewarded. He's made sort of the ruler of the king's affairs in Egypt. So here's Nebuchadnezzar having his worst nightmare. He dreams of this strange and sort of terrifying statue. So what does he do? I mean, what is a king going to do when he has a nightmare? He gets all his magicians and sorcerers and advisors and wise men together, and he doesn't just say, I had this dream. What do you think? He commands him to tell him what the dream was. He didn't tell them what he dreamed. Tell me what I dreamed, and then interpret it. And of course, they can't. So, quote, the king flew into a violent rage and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed, unquote. This seems to be a pattern with these guys. I mean, they fly off the handle and they want to, just kill everybody. Well, Daniel hears about this and wait a minute. And he requests an audience with the king. So Nebuchadnezzar says the same thing to him. Tell me what I dreamed and then interpret the dream. And Daniel says, well, nobody can do that, O king, live forever. Nobody can do that. But there is a God who will reveal the dream and its meaning to me. So here's a really bad image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. It was this huge statue, the head of gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass or bronze, legs of iron, and feet of clay. You've heard that expression, well, so-and-so has feet of clay. Well, that's where this comes from. And then in the dream, a big stone appears out of nowhere, smashes the feet, the clay feet of the statue, and it all falls apart. Very, very terrifying. So Daniel's interpretation of the dream is that the head, which is made of gold, is the Babylonian empire of Nebuchadnezzar. And because it's gold, it's the best empire. But it will fall, and subsequent empires of lesser value will come in and take over. And then eventually it's all going to fall apart because Daniel's God will smash them all and set up a kingdom that will last forever. Well, Nebuchadnezzar thinks this is a pretty good read on his dream. It gratifies his ego at the same time as explaining his fears away. And so Daniel and his friends get big promotions. Another well-known story, very familiar to us in Daniel, is a deliverance story in which the king commands the Jews to worship an idol. They're discovered disobeying. The king orders their execution, but they are miraculously delivered and rewarded. The king learns that the hero's God is all powerful. So if you're a Jew living under yet another time of persecution where your holy temple has been utterly degraded, you want to hear stories like this, that God is going to set this right. and we're going to prevail. And of course, a good example of that very kind of deliverance story is Daniel in the lion's den. And what happens in that story is that King Darius has by then appointed Daniel over the whole kingdom, but the other satraps and governors and rulers in the great hierarchy of the kingdom are jealous, and they conspire against him. They convince the king to decree an ordinance that says anyone found worshiping anybody but the king for 30 days should be thrown to the lions. And so King Darius, signs off on this, but Daniel gets busted by his enemies. They find him praying, and they come and tattle on him to King Darius, who's very distressed to hear this because Daniel is a favorite. Daniel has high favor in the king's eyes, but the king is bound by his own law. So with great regret, he throws Daniel to the lions. So what happens? Obviously, Daniel's delivered by the holy God. And Darius is impressed and relieved and so glad. But then, of course, being a king that he is, he orders all the accusers and the families of the accusers of Daniel to be thrown to the lions. It was rough. It was rough back then. So I always have to throw in a poem for you, and this is a short poem by the great American poet Lucille Clifton. Daniel. I have learned some few things, like when a man walk manly, he don't stumble, even in the lion's den. Okay, so if you can stand it, I know you heard it already this morning, but we're going to revisit this story, this deliverance story of the fiery furnace. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, Daniel's compatriots, are thrown into a furnace of blazing fire because they refused to worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. To me, this story is very funny, and I think the people who were hearing this in the book of Daniel kind of heard it that way too. It's like, ha, 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 look what happens. Look what happens when the evil king tries to force us to, worship another god. Yes, we're living under a wicked king who's doing that, but look what happened to them. So maybe this is going to happen for us too. So we heard it read kind of straight this morning, right? So we're going to mess it up a little bit. Here are our heroes from yet another Sunday school children's Bible, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, looking very courageous and virtuous. So the fiery furnace, starring our heroes with King Nebuchadnezzar and his royal pep band. So what I need is a volunteer to read the part of King Nebuchadnezzar. And whoever volunteers to read it, I would like you to be loud and imperious and totally obnoxious, okay? And then I need 9 people to
Somebody's
volunteer.
looking at me. Go for it.
And then I need 9 volunteers to be the pep band. Anybody interested in that? Oh, come on, I've got instruments for you to play.
I can be part of
You
it.
want to be part of that? Okay, here's your tambourine.
You got your volunteers here in the back standing up.
Okay, okay. Here's your drum.
Oh, yeah.
Are you Nebuchadnezzar? All right.
Oh, boy. Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is kind of a, sort of a flute. Yeah, somebody with good lungs, because it doesn't play very well.
I'll try it.
Who else?
And I cannot remember the bass name.
Come on, this is easy. All you have to do is make noise.
Okay, I'll take a noise maker.
All right.
Oh, that's big.
I've got 2 more. There you go.
That's all right.
And I can't remember.
Here, Roger.
Wow, very impressive.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Where do you want me to stand?
Oh, why don't you come stand up here, O King? Live forever.
All right, get out of the way, get out of the way.
And your part is in bold.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now, pep band members, whenever you hear me say the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, I want you to make noise. So let's try it. Go for it. Oh, that's good. That sounds really awful. Okay, and I will say that and I will point to you when it's time. So you ready? All right. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So when they were all standing before the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, all the peoples and nations and languages fell down and worshiped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, and the entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in. So they brought those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them,
Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods and that you do not worship the statue that I've set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear
the sound of the hornpipe, musical ensemble,
you should fall down and worship the statue I've made. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who will deliver you?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." And Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace to be heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of his strongest guards to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. Blazing fire, here's a furnace. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the furnace of blazing fire. And King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors,
Was it not 3 men that we threw and bound in the fire?
They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied,
But I see 4 men unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of God.
Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said,
Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come out.
So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their tunics were not scorched, and not even the smell of fire came from them. And Nebuchadnezzar said,
Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted him. They disobeyed the king's orders command and yielded their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their house laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way.
And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. The end. Thank you. Very good. Very good.
Fine.
You can be king for a day. Okay. So,
If we had only practiced, we would have been like.
What about the house?
The people that Daniel was living under the persecution of Antiochus with. Think how encouraging this must have been. It's like, we're going to make fun of King Nebuchadnezzar, and we're going to show what an idiot he is, and how, if we are faithful, our God will deliver us, and we will prevail. So it's essentially a book of consolation. Evil, seen here in the form of arrogant kings and kingdoms, will not have the last word. Ultimately, oppressive powers will face God's judgment. But in the short term, the people of God live in a chaotic and violent world. And isn't that true? And so we, in our own time, with our own challenges and sorrows and lamentations and perplexity and fear, can hear these old stories, not as literal truth by any means, but as a metaphor for how the God in whom we trust can work in this world, broken as it is, and deliver God's people. So that's the takeaway of the book of Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a little time. Any questions or comments before we depart? Yeah.
I think one of the most prevailing messages that I hear, especially in this book, is to be faithful, to just don't give in to all the evils that surround us, just to be faithful and keep that in front.
Yeah, in the face of the furnace of blazing fire, whatever that may be in your life. Yes, Steve.
I have a men's Bible program coming up in a couple of weeks. I'd like to get a couple of your maps of the,
Oh, sure.
I'll give you my card, you can, but,
Yeah, sure. I'll be glad to send those to you.
yeah, and then I'll coordinate with Jonathan Jackson.
Okay.
He's our wizard.
Yeah, he's pretty sharp at that. What are you all studying?
It's going to be the Book of Esther, which is a follow-up to the Daniel book.
All
It
right.
takes place about the same era.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, another deliverance story. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Could you go back to the slides with the predictions of protecting the temple or returning the temple to the Jews?
Could you repeat what she said?
She wanted to see the slide about, was it the historical slide about?
The one that relates to current events.
Well, it's not that one.
It's not for the map.
Yeah,
It was a list, a numbered list
of
of,
the kings?
yes.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
none of the kings, of, just confused.
Let's see. Well, bear with me. I have no idea where that is. This one?
No. No.
Okay,
It was a numbered list. It was, it did something about relating to current events.
okay.
I'm making it up.
This one?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that interpret current history. That was
Current to. when it
a
was
current to when it was written. Yeah, 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 and under the king. So,
I find that to be an interesting quote based on current.
yeah, yeah,
And interpreting that
yes,
as a Christian person.
yes. Good point. Thank you. Yeah. Any other comments? All right, thank you. And next week is, what is next week?
Meeting.
Yeah, we don't have
Yeah,
Sunday
next
school.
week.
Oh, that-
But we're supposed to continue to read.
Yeah, yeah, keep on reading. There you go. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.